Hello, my name's Harold Halfdane and welcome to Archaeological Minecraft. I'm a former archaeologist who enjoys playing Minecraft, and I thought it would be fun to combine the two. In today's episode, we'll be talking about a Viking-era turf longhouse. The turf longhouse we'll be replicated in Minecraft is called the Stöng Longhouse. It was owned by a wealthy family and built in the late Norse era, i.e. the late Viking era. We know it was a wealthy family due to the wainscoting on the walls and the lavatory, or washroom, in the house, both of which we will talk about later. Due to the limited quantity of trees in Iceland, it was common for even wealthy longhouses and homes to be built from turf, i.e. dirt and grass, as opposed to being predominantly wooden-sided structures. The tradition of turf houses in Iceland persisted and can even be seen in some modern Icelandic houses even today. The Stöng farm was buried under volcanic ash in 1104 AD from the eruption of the Helka volcano. You can see from the map of Iceland where it's located. I also marked the farm's location in relation to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, so you can see the three there. The site was excavated in 1939, and in 1974 the longhouse and two other buildings on the farm were reconstructed as part of the 1,100-year anniversary celebrations of the settling of Iceland, which occurred in 874 AD. Before we jump into the time-lapse of me building the longhouse, I thought it would be helpful to see a top-down schematic of the structure. I really wish Minecraft had full block signs, or that you could extend signs to attach to one another. If so, that would make my top-down schematic clearer. That said, imagine all these signs are connected and that there aren't any gaps between them. And if you do so, you can see here there is one main rectangular room with three other smaller rooms coming off it. The two rooms which attach to the longhouse at right angles out the back are perhaps later additions to the original structure. The longhouse was a total of 29 meters or 92 feet long. The main hall took up most of the square footage of the structure. The furthest room from the entrance was a main living room. The one room coming off at a mostly right degree angle in real life, it's right degree in Minecraft, because you can't make angles so easily, but the one room coming off that is a mostly right angle on the left being an area for food storage, and the other room across from the entrance was the lavatory, so in other words a washroom. As we jump into the time lapse, you can see the longhouse has stone footings which provide a solid footing for the structure and provide a base for the turf to rest on. It also provides a firm base for the wooden structure to rest on and keep it off the ground to prevent the wood from rotting. An internal wooden structure of posts and beams is what is supporting the load of the building, with the turf walls themselves not being load-bearing. The wooden beams were joined together with notches and wooden pegs as opposed to using nails. The turf walls were made from cut blocks of turf that were around 15 to 20 centimeters thick and around 1 to 1.5 meters in length. After the sections of turf were cut from the ground and pulled up, they were set aside and allowed to dry before use. This produced a stackable block-like structure, nice in Minecraft, which was about the consistency of cork. After being stacked one on top of the other, it would form a finished wall of around 2 meters or 7 feet in thickness. The roof was made by interweaving a layer of small branches together to form a structural latticework, which was laid on top of and attached to the structural support beams. Over top of that would go a layer of turf. Sometimes a layer of bark would be sandwiched between that layer of turf and another layer of turf on top of it, which would provide better water resistance, so kind of waterproofing your roof. A layer of grass was then placed on top of the turf, both on the roof and on the walls. The grass roots would grow into the turf, helping hold the outer structure together, and the grass would shed water and moisture off the longhouse. This would then drain into a gravel base which was around the structure. Wooden-lined holes, like chimneys, penetrated through the roof in both of the main hall and the main living room over the hearths. This would allow smoke to escape the structure. Beyond the wooden chimneys and the front door, there wasn't any wood on the exterior of the turf longhouse. When the longhouse door was shut, those two wooden chimneys might have been the only natural sources of outside light in the building, as it didn't appear that this longhouse contained any windows. However, in some of the Icelandic sagas, a removable screen is mentioned, which would act like a window. It isn't clear how that would work through the turf when the turf walls are 2 meters thick, but the Icelandic sagas do talk about it. The other complication to the windows is that there was an air gap between the outer turf wall and the inner walls of the rooms. This gap would allow for the wooden support structure to not have to make contact with the turf, thus minimizing the wood rot. But the air gap also provided some natural insulation. This air gap was large enough that perhaps people could pass through it. They wouldn't normally do so, but in one Icelandic saga, it tells about how a character in the story made his escape through the air gap between the walls after having killed another character. And in another saga, it talks about 2 assassins being discovered hiding in the space between the turf wall and the interior wooden wall as they waited to strike. Think about that from a Minecraft perspective and how cool that would be to have a cheeky hidden passage within the walls of your longhouse base. Let's head into the longhouse and I can give you a tour. As we enter the house, we step into a small open area that was the Viking Age equivalent of a mudroom or entry room, where you could take off your muddy or wet outer clothes and brush off the snow. It's also possible that tools or other such implements were stored in this open area. At the Stöng Longhouse, there was a small enclosed area next to the entryway, which might have been a small storage or sleeping area. Maybe that's where the dogs or small animals were kept when they were babies. The main hall was separated from the entryway by a small wooden wall. As mentioned before, the main hall is what took up most of the area of the house and had a hearth or fire pit in the middle. Benches lined both sides of the room. The benches on the left side were open and is thought to have been used for sitting, working, or doing other activities while the family was awake. The benches on the other side, on the right side, were partitioned and used as beds. These partitioned areas were quite small, which has led some to guess that perhaps the Vikings may have slept propped up slightly or in a slightly seated position instead of lying flat. It also might be that they were used to sleep in a more curled up position. The main hall also contained a bed closet. The bed closet was a small sleeping chamber for the master of the house and their partner. The bed was located in the closet, which was the same depth as the other sleeping enclosures. The bed took up the whole space of the closet, and there were doors of the sleeping closet which could be locked from the inside. This provided a small amount of privacy, which is extremely rare in the medieval or Viking era. Privacy was a premium and not usually possessed by many. It also provided another layer of security against intruders, while the front door to the longhouse also contained a lock which could be locked from the inside or the outside. There is an Icelandic saga which mentions that one of the characters in the tales had a secret passage in his bed closet which would allow him to escape in case of danger. Before we move to the other rooms, I want to quickly point out the interior wooden walls. In the Stöng Longhouse, the inside was all covered with wainscoting, or basically wooden paneling. As mentioned before, this allowed for an air gap, but it also allowed a space to hide the lower rafters and wall beams while making the inside look cozy and high-end. People like to flaunt if they can, even if they live in a dirt house. The interior doors between rooms were low and the doorways narrow, requiring someone to bend over to pass through it. While the average person historically was shorter than today, this was likely done on purpose to keep the heat better contained within the room. The room furthest from the entrance was the main living room, as mentioned before. This room contained larger seating benches along with tables that might have allowed chests to fit under them for storage. This room also contained the loom. You can see I mocked up what that window might have looked like to let in some light, even though the Stöng Longhouse didn't specifically have one. I used a glowing item frame to replicate what a historic Viking-era window screen might have looked like. They wouldn't have used glass, but rather would have likely had a stretched and thinned out animal skin or animal membrane that would have allowed some light through. If we make our way to the next room, this room might have been a later addition, as was mentioned before. This room was used for dairy and for the storage of other foodstuffs. There was storage vats sunk into the ground to keep them cool and might have held pickled meat. Interestingly, this room had an additional layer of stones between the rafters and the roof. This might have been done to provide additional insulation or maybe helped protect the room where the food was stored from vermins gaining access and burrowing through the turf to get at all the foodstuffs. Heading down to the last room of the turf longhouse, this room might also have been a later addition, as mentioned before. This room was used as a washroom or a lavatory. Its floor contained 2 rows of stone trenches which were set into the floor. The trenches thus act like a gutter to carry the waste out of the house. It's possible that there are wooden benches with holes set in them over the trenches where you can sit and do your business. Well, that's it for my Viking-era turf longhouse tour. If you're ever visiting Iceland, I recommend you visit the Stöng Longhouse and see it for yourself. As always, if you like the video, please leave me a comment, like, subscribe, check out the other videos, and tell a friend about the channel. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye for now.